history. Probably our speaker will speak to that, but you'll realize that some of the earliest languages spoken on radio, earliest were Hausa and Mosi. I learned late recently. Very diversity of this country's history. In all this, we have delivered on our mandate with relish and a sense of mission. But 90 years, that is a lot of time in the lifespan of a person. But for an institution, it is just the beginning. It is just time to change gear and increase acceleration. But in order to change gear and to make GBC more relevant, we have to search for answers that will motivate us. That is why, ladies and gentlemen, if you permit me, I will use the metaphor of the life cycle of the eagle to speak to what GBC looks like. The eagle can live up to 40 years and die. But at 40 years, it has that option not to die. The alternative is it can go into hibernation and renew itself and come out and live for another 40 years. It can live more. But in order to live longer, the eagle must make very hard decisions. When it gets to 40, it develops a very tired body. Its long and flexible talons can no longer grab the prey it would normally do. Its long and sharp beak becomes overgrown and can no more give it the feeding it requires. It gets too curved to eat. Its aged and heavy wings grow thick feathers, become stuck to its chest, and makes it difficult for it to fly. This sounds like GBC. It is at the eagle's 40. The eagle is faced with only two options: starve and die, or go through this painful process of change and rebirth. This process of rebirth can last up to 4 to 5 months when it goes into hibernation. It has to go up the hill and hibernate at the mountaintop on its nest. And during this dormant period, it has to knock its beak against a rock until the beak wears out. There will be blood, but new ones will grow. The next stage is that the eagle will have to wait for the beak to grow. Then it will now pluck off its talons, the overgrown talons, so that it can renew its body. When the new talons grow back, the eagle starts plucking its old feathers. And after 5 months of this painful process, the eagle takes its famous flight of rebirth and lives for another 30 years. This story serves as a powerful metaphor to guide GBC. At 90 years, GBC as a corporate body has grown tired. It needs a moment of rebirth. A birth that will give the corporation a renewed strength to deliver on its mandate. In this process of rebirth, we need a new scheme of service. The new scheme of service, when implemented, will be our moment of knocking off the old, tired beak, plugging off old talons and dead feathers for the new ones to grow. In the process of rebirth, we need a new strategic plan that will chart a new path of flight for GBC. That moment of rebirth, moment of rebirth where the eagle takes off and soar high into the sky. We can do this when we jettison a mindset of entitlement to a performance-driven mindset. Change is unpleasant. It's an unpleasant process, as exemplified by the metaphor of the eagle. It requires that we move from the familiar to the unfamiliar. It can be very disconcerting and necessary. It is necessary that GBC charts a path of growth for the next 90 years. And for us to move into the future, we have to know where it all started. That is why we think that our 90th anniversary should be a moment of reflection. And when you reflect, you go back. We will need a historian, not just a historian, a media historian, to help us excavate, to unearth and unpack our history. That will help us to go into hibernation, to reflect and see how a new GBC can have a flight of rebirth. We cannot pretend and continue to go on like this. So today, we have the honor of having somebody who has spent more time than anyone I have known on the singular subject of the beginnings of radio. Subsequently, we'll have someone who will come and speak to who will speak to a discussion that have often not been raised very much, the role of women in radio. And I say that I have our iconic Venerable Beatrice Edu sitting at the back. And if anybody remembers Ghana's history very well, radio, you will not miss the moment you will remember. And that will also be presented by our own, someone who was my boss in the newsroom, and we worked in the same team together for the second lecture. I will avoid mentioning names at this stage because they will all be properly introduced at the right time. And I believe that this moment of reflection that we'll be listening today, the lecture, will help us set the tone for the moment of reflection that will give us a renewed faith in the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation, that it is a legacy and heritage institution, even as it has been given the fundamental mandate of a public service broadcaster by the 1992 Constitution, with a very independent regulatory mechanism that allows it to report without fear or favor. We'll continue to do that, and I can assure you, insofar as we continue to remain relevant, Ghanaians will continue to rally behind us. On that note, I want to welcome all of you once again to this occasion and this special lecture. Thank you.
Another round of applause for Professor Amin Al-Hassan, the Director General of the GBC. Thank you very much for the thought-provoking welcome address. It's now time for a poetry recital, and we invite Nana Asasi to take the stage.
Ago fiha. Ghana munti, udidi munti, Ghana munti, udidi munti. The struggles of man begin at birth. And so we have walked 60 and 80 years. At 60, they would have expected us to go on retirement. But we have the grace of 8 to start afresh. Sir, then you would have 22 more burdens of colonial legacy to shake off. And so, as we celebrate 60 and 8, 22 and 90, let us go back. Let us do the mathematics. Ghana, what have we heard? How far have we come? What messages were sent from the past to us? And what are we sending to the future? I'm the writer king who sips communion wine from the calabash, my people. I did not come to pour libation. I only came to serve you beautiful sips in your little glasses, so that in such moments of sober contemplation, while we sip on all the history that has been gathered, we can. When a woman is in labor, she does not rejoice. But after she has delivered, she calls for, and we show up to celebrate her. How the blood and toil of our fathers, the tears of our mothers, have shaped the history of this nation, told from different, how to be sons and daughters of this land, and begin to tell our own stories. We, who have been the lion for so long, can we begin to tell our own stories? Can we begin to own our own voices? Can we begin to tell ourselves the truth? For welcome to this place where everybody knows the truth, yet a child is not allowed to tell it. And so, when we have walked 10, they say we are heavy. You see more you do. You see your baby drew. Your baby you drew. You drew a se body. Ukuma pemwa. Sa ukuma pemwa for one PC. What the one PC we are a pembeba. Inti ukuma pemwa a pembeba. Inti ye mo drew. Aqua could do your crown. Would you do your crown? Dear name we have been exalted. Dear Kaye Nyamisu. At 100 then we would be divine. But you see, graciously, we are 60 and 8. The historians might call the figures differently. I am not only a consumer of statistics. I remain a student sitting at the feet of my elders to learn. My people, for as long as we have had this voice in Ghanaian hands, what messages have we received from the past? What messages do we speak now? What messages will we send to the future? And so, we have come down those roads, and the world has yet to point fingers at us. Whether at the left or the right, it would be our choice. Whether an insult or a greeting would still be our choice. Whether a statistic or great history would still be our choice. Where do we go from here? It's on the ends of old ropes that new ones are. And so as we stand at 90 to dream further, let us lend feet to our dreams so that generations yet to enter the thoughts of time will dare to lift their hands, beat their chest, and point them at us in greeting, in celebration, in blessing, and say that our ancestors left us our voices. I'm proud to be Ghanaian. I've not known any colonial master. I will know no other, and I'll hand over a free Ghana to the next generation. My people, if I were receiving ancestral messages, it would be a different matter. But in this day and age, when technology has met our ancestors on these junctions of youth and age, tradition versus modernity, the world is poised to hear the message from the center. Like back in the day, the world would wait to hear Nkrumah's take on any matter. My people, we stand at this crossroads again. And it's by no mistake that you sit where you seated. It's by no mistake that we are at the center of the world. Ago. 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 Intamen krofo say, yenina yembom ni yemfre ye. Yembom ni yemfre nkunyimdi. Yembom ni yemfre nyimdi. Yembom ni yemfre kanko. And so we all come together and call for knowledge, wisdom, courage, advancement, so that we can do very difficult things. Difficult things like placing one foot in front of the other, for that is the only way we make progress, my people. And so the world is listening. And we are housed in the jaws of our voice, ready to keep going. My libation is to you, sir, and to you, ma, and to you, and to all of you who keep the world going round, who will ensure that Ghana, in its history that we make in this room today, will be seen to take its rightful place. Red, gold, green, the histories we make, and a proud black star. Let us not clap our hands anymore. Would you join me in beating your chest? I promise on my honor to be faithful and loyal. I am so proud of Ghana, and I will keep on doing so. I stand to tell the truth just as it is. And whoever meets us, let them know that we are a people, beaten, battered, never broken, so resilient. And so each time we celebrate a birthday, we matter is short. I simply remain a child, committed to learn. Congratulations, Ghana Broadcasting Corporation. Thank you.
That's Nana Sasi for you. When he was done, we're all going to hit our chest by way of clapping. I was thinking we're going to do that just to generate that kind of sound, you know. Can we do that? Yeah, that's better. That's better. Thank you very much. Thank you, Nana Sasi. Thank you. We're going to have the official launch of the anniversary. That's the 90th anniversary. Aside the GBC workers here, which program is the oldest program in Ghana? Who can tell me that? Who can tell me that? Just any GBC program. That's the oldest program in Ghana. In Ghana. Sorry? No, I said no GBC worker is supposed to answer this. No GBC worker is supposed to answer this. And for the non-GBC worker, whoever gets it right, I'll see if the DJ, we can sign some check for the person. All right. I mean, the oldest program in Ghana is Talking Points. And guess how old that program is? 55 years. 1970. And tell me, some programs just last 2-3 years, but as GBC and as a whole heritage ground, we've been able to hold on to a program for 55 years. There's another program that is currently running still, adult education, 45 years, and it's still running. Yes, they have its own changes, it goes through all those processes, but these programs are still running. There are lots of such programs that are still running here at the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation, and that's how resilient we are, and that's how focused we are, by staying to our mandate and ensuring that we do things that project the interest of this country and the development of Mother Ghana. Once again, let's clap for GBC. So, ladies and gentlemen, to help us with the launch, I'm sure she'll have something to say after we should launch the anniversary for us. Let's put our hands together to welcome the NMC chair, Professor Ikea Brichum. Let's put our hands together.
Thank you very much, the MC, George. And thank you also, Nana Sase, for your poetry, very pregnant with information. And if you allow me, everybody here, I would like to rest on the established protocols for brevity and to save time. I bring you warm greetings from the National Media Commission. For us as a body assigned to ensure your independence, it gives us great pleasure to be part of this celebration. Despite the speech of the Director General, there's still a lot to celebrate. That you remain alive and vibrant is enough. As you proceed, of course, you remember we've been told about the time today in 1935 when you started as Radio ZOY, and preceding from the 4 languages we've been told, and later Hausa. We've been told also about your experiences on the Tab 1 and 3, because 13th July also marked a significant watershed in your operations when the president then launched the television. For him, it was a celebration that he could prove the skeptics wrong, that Ghanaians could not manage anything. Ghanaians were not capable. Your presence today and whatever it is you hold is a testimony to that belief. So as you beat your chest and wonder how much you could do, I think there's so much to celebrate. Don't give that up. In fact, in preparing for this launch, even though I have a very short time, I needed to refer back to history. And the launch speech of the president on the 13th of July brought up a number of things that is an acclamation of what you have achieved. But you also are bearing in mind that you want to position yourself to remain relevant and credible to your original mandate. So some of the lessons that I have gleaned that we should keep in mind, rather, is, of course, the whole space that you hold as a public broadcaster in terms of content that reflects, educates, but most importantly, helps to mobilize Ghanaians towards a national goal, which is development. Where are we? Where are we going? And it is your duty to point to where we can go and how we do it. So the education and the need to stress in us, Ghanaians, the conditions of service, because that was also part of the concerns of the president then when he launched the television at that time, explaining what had been done and all that. So one is really very excited that that rests there. The other is the Ghanaianness and the Africanness of your content. And we know that you have your training institutions and all that. But what kinds of connections do you have with writers and artistic talent and how you direct it? You also hold the history of Ghana. No broadcaster, it doesn't matter how much they tend to compete with you, have that store of Ghanaian history in electronic and written form. Of course, for us at the Media Commission, we want to deepen the sense of the insulation of the national broadcaster. It's not just content, it goes beyond that. For us, the fundamental thing is a survival in ways that makes your dependence, that does not allow your dependence to compromise the way you drive your issues. So the future holds challenges. We know the commodification of news and what it brings to you, and your challenge to uphold standards and values and avoid sensationalism, which brings short-term rewards. But I am glad that you seek to rekindle, to rejuvenate, and in your hibernation, as we emerge from your hibernation, I am certain that it will be a drive that brings everybody together. Even as we seek to shed old parts of our body and rejuvenate, I am certain that we'll recognize also what it means, our past, and what it brings to us. So we at the NMC remain committed to supporting you, and we believe that the next time. So I'm wishing you success in the celebration with full confidence that the outcome will bring innovation, strategies that address your relevance and your legitimacy as Ghana Broadcasting Corporation, the public broadcaster. I have indeed great pleasure to declare the 90th anniversary duly launched. Thank you.
Together. All right, so now we have the 90th anniversary duly officially launched, and we'll be for Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, and when he launched television and all that, to prove a point that a black man can do it and do it very well. And the test came in October 21, 1965, when Ghana was going to host the second ordinary session of the Africa Union Organization. Then it was OAU. One of the gentlemen who played a key role, his name is Martin Lowe. He said that Kwame Nkrumah came to GBC, had a meeting with them, and told them that, listen, this is what we are going to do. My colleagues will be coming, and I want them to know that Ghana can do it. We need to pick this life and do whatever it takes for you to pick this life. Well, the guys went out there, all of them from GBC here, and for the first time, they were able to carry the OAU summit to watch. And according to Martin Lowe, who played a role in that production, said that they made sure they had television sets scattered around the conference center, what we could call now the hunchback. Today we have the very flat screen and all that, but those days they had the hunchback, it was black and white. And when the African leaders came through and they saw what Ghana was doing, they were really amazed. We're even doing better than SABC, that's South Africa, and other African countries too. They were so proud. And Ghana created that kind of doorstep and the stepping stone for them to move further to their broadcasting. Martin Lowe said something, that after the entire conference, Kwame Nkrumah came to GBC, had a meeting with the entire production crew, including the head, and he told the head that, you know what, I want you to promote everybody who took part in that production. No explanation, everybody had promotion and some increase in salary. You understand my message now, right? Really pushed them, really pushed them. And after that, they did lots of productions, and Kwame Nkrumah ensured that whatever they needed was given to them. But the instructive aspect was when Kwame Nkrumah came, sure that you increase their salary too. And since then, I mean, GBC, we've been doing this over and over again. Once again, let's put our hands together for the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation. But before that, I would like to invite the Ghana Dance Ensemble for a cultural performance.
very much, Ghana Dance Ensemble. An elegant display of the traditional dance from northern Ghana performed by the Ghana National Dance Ensemble. I'm honored to introduce the person who will deliver the lecture for today. That's the highlight of the entire program. And she's in the person of Dr. Victoria Ellen Smith. Dr. Victoria Ellen Smith is a cultural historian. She is currently senior lecturer in public history in Bath, Spa University, UK, and was previously senior lecturer in history at the University of Ghana. During her 11-year employment at the University of Ghana, she worked tirelessly to establish the Edubahin Memorial Library and Archive, which sits at the heart of Legon campus, for present and future generations of students to develop their skills in historical research. She continues to serve the facility as its founding curator and is passionate about supporting the work of talented young Ghanaian scholars. Dr. Smith is an active member of the Ghana Studies Association, for whom she edits their academic journal, Ghana Studies. Having relocated from Ghana to the United Kingdom in 2023, she co-founded the Southwest and Wales African Research Network. The network brings together UK-based African scholars and scholars of Africa with scholars across the African continent to establish collaborative projects, develop new research, and share scholarly findings. Dr. Smith has worked periodically in Ghana for 25 years, beginning as a researcher for TV3 and Choice FM in 2000. Her interest in the history of the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation began in 2009, whilst undertaking her PhD in Comparative Cultural Studies at the University of Warwick, UK. Having read the papers of a BBC producer seconded to Accra's radio station in the 1950s, she became fascinated by the history of early radio in Ghana. This moved her research focus from the study of pre-colonial Fanti society to the role of radio in the building of our nation. And in the mid-20th century, since then, Dr. Smith has spent more than a decade presenting papers and publishing her work on the early history of the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation, GBC. Her dedication to researching the history of our first radio station and the beginnings of GBC will result in her forthcoming book, Stronger in the Home, Imagining the Nation Through Radio Ghana. Her paper today is titled GBC, the first chapter, The Making of National Radio. I present to you the lecturer for today's presentation, Dr. Victoria Smith. Dr. Smith, your audience, the lecturer today.
Thank you for that kind introduction, and thank you so much to the Director General for inviting me to join you here today. There has been some mention of the history of GBC today already. There has also been some mention of the challenges. How did we grow and how did we become the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation that we are today? So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for welcoming me here today, and I would like to begin. Begin by thinking back to March 1957. To those of you who were born more than 60 years ago, words, at long last, the battle has ended. To those of you who were born into independent Ghana, what memories have you inherited from your parents' and grandparents' generations? Were they in Accra in the thick of the crowds at the old polo ground, witnessing the illumination, singing the new national anthem and the song of the night, E.T. Mensah's Ghana Freedom? Or did they miss? Were they huddled around radios with family and neighbours as the clock struck midnight? Or did they wake up on the morning of 6th March, once the declaration had been made, the Union Jack lowered, and the Black Star raised? On the eve of independence, internationally acclaimed writer Ama Ata Edu, then days from her 15th birthday, and a student at Wesley Girls High School, was determined to be a part of that moment, a moment that hailed a new era in which she would forever be Fanti, but also Ghanaian. There was a radio rediffusion box in Edu's school assembly hall, and throughout the day she had heard announcements that Nkrumah's declaration would be broadcast live. Edu and her Bellamy House peers were determined to listen, to witness the moment through radio. At 75 years of age, Edu recalled that it was way past lights out, but we had been creeping around and managed to get into the assembly hall. We had gone to hide in the basement where they kept the theatre props, intending, of course, that some minutes to midnight we would pop up and go and listen to the radio. Unfortunately for Edu and her friends, the formidable headmistress became aware of the plans and marched to the hall. The girls scattered and missed the live broadcast. But what is important here is the intention behind this rebellious act. A young Edu in Cape Coast wanted to be a part of the moment of independence when it was declared in Accra, because it was her independence. She wanted to share it with the real community of her school friends and a new imagined community of fellow Ghanaians. She wanted to listen simultaneously with those that she imagined from Nandom to Nungwa, from Sampa to Jasikan, as that moment was shared together. Away from central Accra, many more had the same intention as Edu. Men, women and children gathered around radio loudspeakers at local markets and lorry parks, in the compounds of chiefs and elders, or at home, where a wireless set occasionally replaced the more typical rediffusion box. There, many fell silent. Not the type of silence that accompanies a lack of words, but one that prioritized. Young and old listened. They listened attentively and collectively. Ghana Broadcasting System was going to be born, along with this nation. Now, the name Radio Ghana is one that many think of today when they think of radio at the moment of independence. This popular name was not a media invention or a public fashion. Instead, the national campaigner and newly appointed Minister of the Interior, Ebenezer Akko-Adjei, had made an announcement at Broadcasting House that the station would be called the Ghana National Broadcasting System, or more popularly, Radio Ghana. Whilst the national was dropped, Radio Ghana continues to be the name used to speak about radio in the 1950s and 1960s. At Broadcasting House, it had been decided ahead of independence that the task of presenting the live coverage would fall to a 25-year-old Frank Parks, who would go on to become an influential figure in literature, broadcasting, and filmmaking. In January 1955, Parks had made a positive impression on the broadcasting department when he demonstrated his skills as a writer by winning a radio short story competition. He was employed as programme assistant later that year to write and edit scripts, announce in English, and produce programmes. He quickly gained a reputation as an intelligent orator who described live events in such vivid detail that the listeners were transported to the places that they had never been. Thus, in 1957, supported by a technical and production team, he presented the live outside broadcast. As the crowds waited for Nkrumah to appear, Parks ad-libbed about the scene that played out before him, so that listeners, grouped in domestic and public spaces across the country, could join the celebration via radio. It is estimated that at the time, almost half of Ghana's population had some form of access to radio. Million people. Naturally, they could not all have followed the broadcast in English. The jubilation would have been palpable. But it took the translation, storytelling, and broadcasting skills of the local language services teams to reach Radio Ghana's multicultural language service. It was broadcasting in Akan as Tree and Fanti, Ga Dangme, Ewe, Dagbani, and Hausa. From dense urban centres to remote villages to proclaim the news that today, from now on, there is a new African in the world. I have begun by narrating the role of radio in the Declaration of Independence to highlight the phenomenal social significance. It was a time in which newspapers were well established, but before television, commercial media, and the internet. In speaking of this national moment of global importance, I have begun with the temporal endpoint of this period, the period over which this paper will cover, as it provides a moment in which the three themes that I will explore can be illustrated most vividly. Firstly, we will look back today on how GBC began as Station ZOY, developed as the Gold Coast Broadcasting Service, and became the Ghana Broadcasting System, all of which constitute this first chapter in the history of GBC. In covering a period from the early 1930s to the late 1950s, we will not discuss later decades, although they are undoubtedly incredibly significant in GBC's history. The 1961, the launch of television in 1965, and in the incorporation of GBC in 1968. Certainly each decade in this 90-year history is fascinating in its character and critical importance to the development of the national broadcaster and the nation that it serves. But today we shall focus, as the title of this lecture indicates, on GBC, the first chapter, the making of national radio. This will see us ending where we have begun, in the 1950s. Popularity. To ask what made radio so popular from that very first broadcast in 1935. Despite being a colonial system in its technology and content, it had the ability to transcend factors of literacy, gender, geography. 48, the Colonial Office in London put the British broadcasting staff in Accra under pressure to employ radio so that it might strengthen anti-colonial nations. So, it might cause stability in the face of strengthening anti-colonial nationalism. As such, we will also explore how the creative, resourceful, and skilled compliance to the colonial state, how they made radio relevant to the listening public that was rising to the call of self-governance now. In doing so, radio successfully transitioned from European to African control as the voice of Ghana. My third and final area of concern returns us to the 1950s, to explore the relationship between radio and nation-making. With independence came the instruction that citizens were now defined by the deepest sense of self, came from affiliation to one or more of Ghana's diverse ancestral identities, built on ancient systems of kinship, chieftaincy, linguistics, land rights, beliefs, traditions, and so forth. The argument here is not that the relationship between radio and nation-making is one of determinism. Radio did not directly influence the nationalist campaign. But as we will see, the GBC soundscape of the 1950s supported the listening public as they negotiated what it would mean to be Ghanaian in a post-colonial world. To borrow the words of radio, was through rumours about why large wooden poles were being erected across the city. and connected by overhead wires. Residents of the capital watched with suspicion as hundreds of rediffusion boxes were then connected to that web of wires. Popular venue for public functions. The British colonial governor, Arnold Hodgson, is said to have favoured a wired rediffusion system, despite there being no example of the same elsewhere in Africa, because it met the aim of making radio accessible to African listeners without risking exposure to potentially subversive external wireless stations. This system provided the colonial authorities with complete control over radio. Without private sets and transistors, audiences could only switch the units off and on and change the volume. In the 1930s, there was one channel and one voice, that of the British Broadcasting Corporation. It gets better, I promise. Hodgson had experience of setting up radio services in the Falkland Islands and Sierra Leone. His vision for the Gold Coast was a system that reached the remotest villages. It was demonstrably incapable of providing for the diverse, multicultural, multilingual mass audience to whom it was presented. At the beginning, Station ZOY, as it was known due to its call sign, Byron, 3 Ghanaian technical staff reported for duty in April 1935 at a small bungalow near Ridge Police Station that we now know as BH1. The technical and engineering team grew quickly to a team of 10 men. By the time the inaugural broadcast appeared on July 31st, just 3 months later, they were ready. Having completed the mass listening venue at Palladium Cinema. R. Buckman of the technical team reflected that radio promised to end the barriers of isolation and ignorance. These were in the path of progress, and that national and world events would from then on be close to most isolated homes. In his inaugural broadcast, the British governor aligned with Buckman by hailing radio as providing escapism and companionship. However, these claims that the world would become less unfamiliar thanks to earliest radio may seem debatable once we shed light on this inaugural broadcast. The BBC began its external service in December 1932. The service was established to rebroadcast programmes from London to selected countries across the world via these wired rediffusion systems. The British government's broadcasting agenda, delivered by the BBC, was one of cultural imperialism, a process of social influence by which a nation imposes its beliefs, values, knowledge and behavioural norms on other countries through exposure to the cultural way of life. At its establishment, Station ZOY relayed BBC programmes from the core of the British Empire to what for most London-based broadcasters was an imagined periphery in West Africa. It was London calling. And programme content was intended to deliver news and information that the Colonial Office wanted the people of the Gold Coast colony to know. As BBC yearbooks of that time indicate, their openly acknowledged aims were to present a celebration of British achievement and British culture, to explain how problems that the colonies might face had been successfully tackled by Britain, and perhaps the most loaded purpose of all, just to be friendly. As an imperialist device, radio had been tasked with manipulating people's worldviews in favour of colonial rule and framing the imposed British culture as aspirational. However, this agenda could not penetrate for the simple reason that radio was entirely in English. And as Paul Anser argued in his anniversary lecture at GBC's Golden Jubilee, English language programmes in the 1930s only communicated with those who were already in support of the British. On the day of the inaugural broadcast, a Wednesday, expectant crowds gathered at Palladium Square. At 5 p.m, gramophone records began to play from all the loudspeakers simultaneously. Fascinated to see where the music was coming from, some reportedly forced their way inside the Palladium to find its source. After 45 minutes, the music stopped, and as an eyewitness, Next came the British national anthem and 2 speeches. The first was by Hodson, who spoke from the studio at BH1 about the wonders of radio. This speech is now well known to those of you who have thought about the anniversaries over the years. He said, "It is very similar to the magic stone we read about in fairy tales. We press a button and are transported to London. Again we press it and hear an opera from Berlin." Hodson then informed the bemused crowd that the whole world would be at their beck and call before making specific appeals to Ghanaian families. Mothers, he went on, when the children are being fractious, or when they have had a trying day cooking and washing clothes, or men who have had a hard day's work will sit down and listen to first-class music which will banish their cares and make them forget all their worries. As though proving the magic that radio was capable of, the second speech came live from London, where the Secretary of State for the Colonies, Sir Malcolm MacDonald, spoke about the pleasure and interest that radio would bring its listeners. Evidently convinced, like Hodson, that the people of Accra needed even greater interaction with the colonisers, MacDonald proclaimed that radio would enable listeners to keep in closer and more immediate touch with Britain and His Majesty the King. These occasions, he went on, bring home to us the real and intimate community which exists between the people all over the world over whom His Majesty reigns. He concluded that the colonial broadcasting services should be used not only as instruments of entertainment and recreation, though they remained the primary use, but also as a means of giving education both generally and in such important specialist fields as public health and agriculture. Finally, as the BBC World News began, the fascination of Ghana's first radio audience was complete. The meaning of the inaugural broadcast was lost to many. However, today, our ability to dismiss early colonial radio as a communication tool for a limited English-speaking audience is disrupted by the content of these addresses within the colonial system of indirect rule. To achieve this, to reach and communicate with a mass listenership, radio needed to be more than novel. It needed to be accessible to all. And yet, for reasons of technology, language, and representation, early radio could only have a very limited audience. As eyewitnesses recall, when the inaugural broadcast ended, those present immediately asked for loudspeakers to be mounted in their communities. The frustrated cries of, "Everything for Accra, what about Koforidwa?" And many more towns were called out that day. In the days and weeks that followed, the district commissioners requested radios for each of them. More importantly, letters requesting the extension of the service came directly from residents of towns, villages, and mining communities. What's more, a seemingly endless succession of chiefs and their entourages appeared at BH1 to request radio. Rediffusion stations soon appeared in Cape Coast, Sekondi, Kumasi, and Koforidwa, as well as royal residences, family homes, and increasingly places of work and education. Large crowds were regularly seen gathering around rediffusion boxes in their neighbours' compounds, where they might listen to the English received pronunciation of this stranger in the home, as it was known. Despite the alien nature of programme content, colonial Ghana was soon considered by the BBC's Empire Service as one of the most radio-minded of all the colonies. As a result of radio's popularity in its first 4 years, more funding was made available so that the engineers could establish 16 more wired broadcasting stations, attracting 4,000 subscribers. Now, because of communal listening and some conservative calculations that might average around 7 listeners per set, we can assume that radio's audience in 1939 was around 28,000 people. Now, the physical attributes of the wired distribution system meant that those early audiences were somewhat inclusive. Because radio was fixed in the communal domestic spaces, listening could not be limited to certain members of the household, or even a single owner who might take a wireless set with them when they left the house to go to their workplace. As such, men, women and children alike shared equal access. Furthermore, the mass listening locations in public spaces, such as markets and lorry parks, prevented access from being limited on grounds of status or wealth. That said, an English language education continued to be a crucial factor in gaining access, as did the location of relay stations, which continued to be clustered in the south of the country. In 1939, it was not only popular demand that dictated the speed with which radio expanded, but also the threat of war. With the official outbreak of World War II came the introduction of local language broadcasting, a critical change that altered the future of radio. In 1939, the expansion of radio proved its importance to existing and potential audiences when an earthquake hit. While the epicenter was offshore, the effect of the quake was felt strongly in coastal communities. A listener who was living in Obuasi informed me that her radio had been on when the tremors began, and she might have panicked, not known what to do. But the announcer told her in a calm voice to leave her property and find somewhere safe to wait until the earthquake was over. Even before the establishment of local language broadcasting, radio was finding a way to be relevant. Even without the language being comprehended by everyone, radio's soundscape was serving as an alarm clock, providing a schedule for the day, and even saving lives. Due to the looming threat of large-scale war in Europe in the same year, radio's core purpose quickly became the mobilization of people in support of the war effort. 65,000 Ghanaians were recruited into the British Armed Forces and, eager for news of their countrymen, those at home turned to radio. The Department of Information was formed and made responsible for broadcasting. It was instructed to meet the objective of conveying to the people of the Gold Coast news of the progress of war, which naturally seemed, for the most part, remote. To meet this objective, it became a priority that radio news should be understood by the masses. Civil servants were seconded to the Department of Information to translate BBC News into Ga, Twi, Fanti and Ewe. Known as vernacular announcers, or VAs, most were teachers, chosen for their level of education, their ability to convey meaning through appropriate local idioms, and their credibility. It was felt that the voices of teachers would be best suited to countering rumours and misinformation. A former VA wrote that in fulfilling their translation duties, the culture among vernacular announcers was one of consciously setting the standard and contributing directly and indirectly to the development of languages on radio. As we will see, VAs achieved this through translation work, but also increasingly the development of original, locally produced programming. This expansion in radio led to the second broadcasting house, now known as Old House, opening next to Flagstaff House in 1940, with a larger transmitter and more studio space for local content to be produced. In 1943, the continued pressure to convey news of war led to the formal establishment of local language broadcasting and the addition of Hausa. The Hausa service came about due to the large number of Hausa-speaking soldiers serving in the British Army who'd been recruited in Ghana. The colonial belief was that Hausa was the language most accessible to listeners in and from Northern. Has reflected that Hausa was initially chosen instead of the major Northern language of Dagbani, because the colonial authorities perceived of all West African Muslims as almost related. As such, if Hausa could be understood by Muslims that had come to Accra from elsewhere, they could be understood by those in northern Ghana. There was also a general perception that Christians from northern Ghana spoke English. It would be the responsibility then of the Dagomba VAs employed to the Hausa section to overcome this misconception and create opportunities for broadcasting in Dagbani. VAs were organised under programme officers, one in charge of Hausa, Ewe and Ga, and the other in charge of Akan, to enable audiences to understand that drew from familiar nature, such as a chameleon being like camouflage wear. Translation enabled Ghanaian broadcasting and creativity, and to evidence the worth of investing in local language services. Scholars of African radio agree that expanding indigenous language broadcasting helps populations reconnect with their cultural roots. That communication in local languages played a crucial role in promoting the recovery and celebration of pre-colonial histories, languages, belief systems and art forms as part of post-colonial nation-making. Thus, as local language broadcasters translated news of distant but present war, they also made strategic use of radio to facilitate a reinvigoration of West African culture through original programme making. Through the work of the VAs during World War II, the familiarity of their voices, the use of the vernacular, and the relatable imagery that they used, radio went from being a peculiarity to a trusted provider of news and information, of relevant cultural exchange. According to overcame doubts about imperial war propaganda, and the question, did you hear it on station ZOY, became a popular verification of truth. Radio had become not only popular, but also credible. Over time, Ghanaian broadcasters would seize greater autonomy to develop original programmes in local languages that would bring regional arts, beliefs, interests and concerns to the forefront of radio. As well as news translation, they translated literature, delivered talks, recorded local music, and produced a range of original programmes that intentionally propagated indigenous culture. Aware that all broadcasting was governed by the BBC, based on British interests and value judgments, the VAs carefully, at the same time, they strive to be culturally relevant and enable mass audiences to experience their own and neighbouring cultures via radio. In doing so, they actively foster the future of broadcasting. Local language service staff had far more agency in producing radio programmes than the titles with BBC-shaped imperialist worldviews. Through the development of a service that prioritised programmes of local origin. As war came to an end, some announcers returned to their former place of employment, whilst others were officially recruited as programme staff by the expanded Ministry of Information and Broadcasting. According to Gajipo, who was promoted to as they had done in times of war. In the late 1940s, the Ghanaian political scene was extremely active, and the colonial government grew increasingly anxious and highly suspicious as the march from colonial rule to self-governance found its pace. In 1947, tensions were already so high that "What is the Hour" had been heard on the radio. Security forces had assumed that the lyrics were a message to the British that they should leave the Gold Coast. The song was, in fact, being broadcast in London as part of a BBC's Choice programme. Within this post-war era, evidence suggests that even the most nationalist-minded of Station ZOY programme staff understood that radio could incite an uprising. And so, as employees of a state-owned radio station, they were careful not to broadcast content that may appear subversive. GBC's own Golden Jubilee brochure states that broadcasters had to be an important word here. Although VAs were not broadcasting in a language that the British could understand, evidence suggests that they maintained political neutrality whilst on air, only taking the liberty to insert local jokes and sayings into announcements to make content more interesting to the local listening audience. Adu has explained in interview that she regretted writing in English. She explains how lucky, in her words, she felt that colonial broadcasting policy accepted the initiative of these VAs to develop local language services, rather than African languages being banned as they had been in colonial radio services elsewhere on the continent. Make us into little Englishmen and English women. But then our radio had gone on its own tangent. And I mean, there were 5 Ghanaian languages or 6. It wasn't their colonial project to encourage us to speak in our languages, but they didn't stop us, transmitted to our people. The signing of the Atlantic Charter in 1941, the end of World War II in 1945, and as significantly, the tragedy of the British needed to reimagine radio if it was going to stay relevant to those living under colonial rule, so that listeners might remain tuned in to empire. To achieve this, the BBC's new African service produced programmes aimed specifically at audiences in Anglophone West Africa. Furthermore, investment was made in extending the reach of radio technology so that Ghanaian broadcasters could create their own department, provided the machinery for transmitting programmes to relay stations set up before the war. But engineers and technicians alone rehearsed them somehow outside for a few minutes and put them on air. Besides guitar bands, listeners wanted speech programmes. They wanted variety. Study at the BBC. These were awarded to programme assistants who were selected for a 6-week course in London that compromised. This was life-changing. Frances Ademola, then Kwashi Aiden, recalls that her auspicious career in broadcasting began by accident at this time. Her father, a Supreme Court judge, had received a call from the Colonial Liaison Department explaining that they had a list of men to attend a BBC training course in London and they needed a woman. Reflecting on this in 2017, Ademola felt that her unplanned entry into broadcasting had been the turning point of her life. Scholars of African radio studies now recognise the importance of the relationship between media representation and cultural advocacy, and the positive impact of normalising broadcasting in marginalised languages, how it strengthens cultural confidence and can combat the strategic underdevelopment that was written into colonial policy. Scholars understand that now, but Dagbani broadcasters such as Albert Derimanu instinctively knew that they had to push for their own language service from within Broadcasting House. As a result of their determination, the final local language section to be developed ahead of independence was the Dagbani section, which, as I've said, began in 1951. Without proximity to public loudspeakers, a home rediffusion box, or a private wireless set, potential listeners in northern Ghana could not begin to access radio. Further, without radio being presented in a language you can speak, performances that reference familiar culture, or recognising oneself in the content and ambition of programmes, radio will remain inaccessible in its value. Abu states that in those days, the North was seen as a labour force. So when the South needed labour for cocoa farms and the mines, they would go to the North and bring them down. They saw no need to educate us. That was why broadcasting did not reach the North in time. So it was not until the establishment of the Dagbani service that radio reached northern Ghana in a meaningful way, with broadcasters speaking Dagbani, showcasing Dagomba culture and knowledge, and responding to Dagbani interests and concerns. Amongst the first Dagomba broadcasters assigned to the service was a young policeman, B.A. Yakubu. He, of course, went on to become IGP and Yana. In those days, explains Abu, there were few elite from the north, and B.A. Yakubu was one of them. Broadcasting would become very important to the northerners, and the first thing to do was to educate them through media. It was this that promoted B.A., although a policeman, to become involved in broadcasting to the north. He was only speaking Dagbani, and when they saw that he was their man, speaking their language to them, the information went deep. With Derimanu and other VAs, while they were arguably the earliest Ghanaian programme makers, radio content designed specifically for local language audiences began with the likes of Yakubu and his colleagues when they sat at the microphone. For the first time, local news stories, live events, documentaries and cultural performances were being broadcast from a local studio through Accra, then at BH2, to audiences across the country, particularly those at home in the north. The Dagbani service developed a schedule of regular original programs that sought to educate the youth on personal growth, teach about current affairs, showcase respected storytellers reciting oral traditions and relating them to the present, and many more programs beside. Listeners regularly submitted their stories for broadcast, and traditional Dagomba imagery, such as that of the hunter, appeared in both fiction and memoir. Listeners would also write letters from both sides of the Ghana-Togo border to request that traditional Dagbani stories be told on air. Where the English service or another vernacular service produced a programme that the Dagbani team felt would be of relevance, such as that on agricultural methods produced by the Rural Broadcasting Unit, these were translated and aired on national radio so that they could be listened to by audiences all over the country. Equally, when Dagbani produced something that would be of interest elsewhere, the other local language teams picked that up and translated it also. Former teacher and regional director of education, Alhaji Mohammed Harun, recited Dagomba stories for radio when he was a child. He was proud of his contribution to preserving Dagbani oral tradition and explained that the Dagomba service had helped to combat the north-south dichotomy. That whilst it was common for initiatives to start in the south and come north, the arrival of radio let people know that they were a part of a national discourse. He explains, "It made the people feel that they were part of the country. When people that you knew were heard on radio, performing our music, it was for us, but also for the whole country. They could hear our music and our songs, and these were introduced with an explanation of meaning. Radio made some of the Southerners realise that we were more advanced than they thought. They began to see Ghana as having a variety of tribes and that we were all cousins." As such, he argues that cultural exchange through radio enabled national tolerance, understanding, and national unity on the eve of independence. As we will see, the theme of national unity will prove critical in developing a blueprint for radio's transition from colonial mouthpiece to independent national broadcaster. With an increase in budget through the 1951 Development Plan, broadcasting activities underwent significant change during the 1950s, as an ambitious proposal was made to establish a national radio service. With the British Empire collapsing and the arrival of Ghana's independence seeming inevitable, the colonial government began to offer more Ghanaian programme makers the BBC production training course. In 1949, one of those attendees was Joseph Gati, who would become the first Ghanaian head of programmes. In the 1951 cohort, we see the likes of Sam Afatefio, Florence Pra, Sam Morris, and Marion Smith-Mensah. Having been released from prison following accusations of inciting the 1948 riots, Nkrumah was also in London in 1951. Whilst there, he spoke to the former Director General of the BBC, Lord John Reith, about establishing an independent, comprehensive broadcasting service for Ghana. This resulted in a team of advisors touring the country to consult Ghanaian audiences in 1953. This 1953 Broadcasting Commission concluded that Nkrumah, by then Prime Minister, had made a feasible suggestion, and the report recommended a Gold Coast broadcasting service be established. The report served as this blueprint for the development of the service, and through it, we can identify a path that leads to the GBC that we know today. The commission was chaired by the BBC's head of colonial service and 2 other BBC employees, including James Miller, who would become the first Director General of GBC, as well as Robert Baffour, a mechanical engineer for the Accra Town Council. Their task was to consider all aspects of the development of broadcasting in the colonial Ghana as it was still at the time. This included costing and staff training, relay and rural broadcasting, technical equipment and engineering, programme content, and how broadcasting may be utilised for educational and social welfare purposes. They recommended that existing programme staff begin by working with BBC staff who would come on secondment from 1954. Additional programme assistants were recruited in the 1955 employment drive and thereafter. Robert Owusu, whose career with GBC would span 39 years, was recruited having responded to a news advert for The Drive. I was the youngest among 15 applicants, he explained to me. We were given training in the rudiments of broadcasting. It was for 3 weeks, intensive training. We did everything: script writing, production, studio management. Owusu was in the first batch to pass through the Gold Coast Broadcasting Service's very own training school, then under Leslie Perrone. The vision was that government control would gradually lessen as experienced West African broadcasters and newly recruited technical and production staff were trained to run a broadcasting corporation that would become independent of government and, quote, entirely composed of Gold Coast men and women. The official line from London was one of radio continuing colonial propaganda and compliance. However, evidence largely suggests that those seconded from the BBC viewed their role as positively responding to the specific political milieu, the imminence and unprecedented nature of Ghana's independence. By supporting Ghanaian broadcasters in preparing for the National Radio Service and its role in independent Ghana. The Gold Coast Broadcasting Service's first head of programmes, Henry Swansea, had prepared himself for secondment by setting out his plans in a letter titled Preliminary Thoughts on a Radio Service as Support for Young Nationalism. His vision for the first phase of programming explored ideas about modern and traditional music, entertainment and information, Ghana's pre-colonial history, world religion, and original literary programmes. The literary programme he envisioned came to fruition as The Singing Net, which we would re-see again later as Voices of Our Time. It featured the exceptional writing and performance skills of the likes of Efwa Sutherland, Andrew Opoku, Gyombe Adali-Morti, Albert Caper-Mensah, Joyce Addo, Frank Parkes, and Henry Ofori. Print journalist Cameron Duodu, who also became editor of radio news at GBC, was a contributor. He spoke highly of the literary programme, but his experience was not always positive. He recalls that when his short story Tough Guy in Town was broadcast, he was shocked to realise that the end had been changed without his consent. Originally, the tough guy was not punished for getting the better of some guy who had annoyed him in a nightclub. But in the recorded version, the hero no longer referenced a traditional Asante trickster character. Instead, he had been emasculated into a conventional troublemaker, punished by the judicial system. Swansea had rewritten the story as a moral, law-abiding tale. When Duodu confronted Swansea, he replied, "We have to take the whole population into account when we broadcast things, you know. And you can't take the risk of broadcasting examples of bad behaviour in case it influences other people to imitate and act likewise." Duodu argues that the editorial principles imposed on Tough Guy in Town were born from a larger and evidently still present colonial mandate to maintain order and prevent social and political uprising. The prevalent dynamic between British and Ghanaian broadcasters was informed by mutual agreement that Ghana was too far from London and too close to independence for the Gold Coast Broadcasting Service to be answerable to outdated, imperially constructed BBC principles. But here, Swansea was positioning himself as gatekeeper with paternal responsibility for setting a good example. Largely, Duodu and Swansea admired each other, but this was an incident that Duodu has described accurately as his first experience of cultural imperialism. The Gold Coast Broadcasting Service continued to relay BBC programmes such as news bulletins in English and translation, as well as the Calling West Africa series until independence. A greater variety of BBC content was also translated into local languages, and crucially, new locally originating programmes were developed. To extend programming into the remote areas, the Commission report stated that rural audiences needed to be convinced of the relevance of radio. It was recommended that this was done through a new type of educational programming that looked forward to self-governance rather than seeking to maintain colonial rule. The report states that radio should help listeners to prevent disease, to improve agricultural methods, and to start to build a spirit of national unity and political awareness. It was to enrich all listeners' lives with new experiences. Furthermore, the report advises that local languages and culturally specific idioms should be used in abundance, and that a deliberate attempt must be made to capture the local audience by giving them their music, their storytelling, and their voices on the microphone. The colonial government's control was to be as light as possible in order that the service may have a chance to develop a spirit of independence. Upon returning to Ghana, Ademola joined the programming team in Accra and produced the broadcasting service's new weekly programme, Sunday Magazine, which she described as a roundup of the week's events, as well as People in the News, in which she interviewed visitors who came to Ghana from all over the world. Later, she produced the educational programme 10 Minutes of English, in which she employed a light-hearted approach to help listeners improve their spoken English. Other programmes on the English language service that some of you might remember include Radio Doctor, Women's Half Hour, the documentary series Work in Progress, more educational programmes for adults and children, the newsreel Window on the World, the fortnightly discussion series Seconds Out, and the arts programme Sound Judgment. There was also a programme about other West African countries called Good Neighbours, music request shows that seemed to play Ephraim Amu's Yenara Assassini on repeat, and the popular variety show Everybody Loves Saturday Night, which produced the comic figure of Issa Bongo, played by Sergeant Harry Dodu. The Gold Coast Broadcasting Service was the official identity of GBC from 1954, when it replaced the colonial station ZOY, until 1957, when it was replaced by the Ghana Broadcasting System. In reflecting on this period of transition, Miller concludes that under the control of Ghanaian broadcasters, listeners were finally experiencing the emergence of an African personality on radio. It was through the initiative, creativity, and technical skills of committed Ghanaian broadcasters that radio underwent this transformation, from the instrument of the colonial government to the nation's first African broadcasting service. The voices on the microphone were speaking in English and the 6 Ghanaian languages on radio. In 1957, staff numbers totaled 1,115, including 72 senior staff, of which 58 were African. Over a 4-year period, from 1954, the time devoted to locally originating programmes at 74 hours a week had trebled, with now only 19 hours of BBC. The broadcasting system's policy of Africanisation in preparation for independence was evidently successful. The audience was young, with 75% being under 30. At least 60% spoke English, and their peak listening times were before and after work, 6 to 7:15 a.m. and 5:30 to 8:30 p.m. But these statistics underplay the continued impact of local language services that we have already discussed. On the occasion of GBC's 80th anniversary, former GBC board chairman, Professor Stephen Adai, shared his memories of early local language broadcasting. In the good old days of GBC, he said, even from where I grew up in the farthest part of the globe, Gambaga, I could learn about the cultures of Dagbanis, Gars, Akans, and Ewes just because there was a radio box in my father's house where he ate, and then we would go there and we would listen to the voices. The value of this cultural exchange was threefold. Firstly, those who contributed the local language programmes felt a great sense of pride within their community at having represented their culture. Secondly, like Adai, there was great interest in learning from and about one's neighbours. And thirdly, with the imminent arrival of independence, there was a need to negotiate what it might mean to be Ghanaian, what a collective identity might be, and how it would continue to celebrate diverse ancestral identities. The renowned musicologist, Professor J.H. Kwabena Nketia, spoke with the same pride as Cambodia when he told me about hearing school children in the streets singing his song, Ya Non Montier. He assigned its popularity to the fact that it was the signature tune for the literary programme, The Singing Net. For the first time, he declared, we were hearing ourselves. Radio Ghana was doing that. He went on to explain that the 1950s marked the beginning of the rediscovery of Ghana's traditions. It was, he said, the beginning of reconciling ethnicity and nationhood, a way of unifying the old traditions and the contemporary situation to push back against the detrimental impact of overexposure to European cultures. Nketia considered his task as composer, scholar, and radio contributor to be one of bringing the traditional performances from out of the people's reach, through Accra, onto the radio, so that they might be disseminated across the country. We now had a base in radio, he continued, for thinking about African literature, of African music, of African dance on our own terms. Every radio contributor that I have spoken to over more than a decade of researching the early history of GBC has reiterated the same point, that they have taken immense pride in being a part of the unifying act of cultural exchange that radio made possible. In 2016, Professor Atukwe Okai spoke about moving back to Accra at 15 years old and submitting his poems to the Broadcasting House. He was, in his own words, just a Ga boy from Gambaga. And he could not believe what would happen next. Now, a month later, Okai explained, he heard, "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight we are going to present works by two young Ghanaian poets. One is this and the other is J.D.A. Okai." My father's room had a radio on the windowsill, he explained. And I was standing outside the room and the palm trees were fluttering in the skies. So I stood there and they read my poem. And I heard my name and my poetry going out to my people. It was most moving, very encouraging, inspiring, and very special. I think everything started from there. It was wonderful. With its modest colonial beginnings, a distant memory, radio in the 1950s actively supported the agenda of national unity. At GBC's 50th anniversary, it was contended that the relatively brief era of the Gold Coast Broadcasting Service had parted the veils separating the main ethnic groups, enabling them to talk to each other and learn each other's customs and social habits. More than ever before, radio gave them the opportunity to see themselves as one people, pursuing similar goals to attain a common destiny. This achievement would not have been possible without the Africanization of radio that began with vernacular announcers, the founders of local language broadcasting, and was taken up by those who were willing to represent their cultures on national radio. There are many fascinating decades in GBC's 90-year history that span from 1935 right the way through to our standing here in 2025. As we have seen, radio has the power to transform the lives of individuals and the nation, to shape international relations and bring together immediate neighbours. But political divisions still need to be overcome, and regional tensions still need to be resolved. Over the last 25 years that I've spent in Ghana, I have witnessed the power of radio and television to celebrate this country's incredible multicultural, multilingual diversity, to guide listeners in acts of democracy and tolerance, and to harness cultural exchange as a key factor in ensuring national unity. If Ghana was born through radio, then let it continue to grow in the same way. In March 2010, Duodu wrote, "Let's hope I shall still be around when the GBC's centenary celebration takes place. For I am sure that by the time the institution reaches its 100th anniversary, it will have come to appreciate that some of us, unsung though we are, contributed to make it what it is today. To Duodu and the other pioneering broadcasts who have been mentioned today, to those who I have not had time to mention, to those from whom we can still learn about GBC's rich history, and to those of blessed memory. The story of the first chapter of GBC is your story, and it has been my privilege to narrate it. Finally, to those of you who go on to shape GBC's future, the next 90 years, as broadcasters, contributors, and audiences, Ayaku. May the next 90 years of Ghana Broadcasting Corporation continue to be filled with progress, passion, and professionalism. Thank you.
Brilliantly done. Doc, thank you very much. Thank you very much. And I mean, listening to her, for a moment, I thought I was even 100 years old because I could reflect on those things going through. Thanks a lot. It was great hearing you in this address, too. I'm from radio. Originally, I'm a radio person, and I love radio. When I came to GBC, I was told that radio is for ladies and gentlemen. So when you're on air, you need to act as such, as a lady and as a gentleman and addressing people. Just to shoot small. So technically it is radio that is 90, not TV, but I mean, yes, the whole Ghana Broadcasting Corporation is 90 years. So once again, let's put our hands together for Dr. Victoria Smith. You can decide to search her out on the internet. She has interesting research works, not only on GBC Radio, but even languages here in Ghana and all that. Very interesting one. I understand that you worked at Choice FM? Long time ago. There's someone who knows you at Choice FM. The person worked with you, and the person is here in GBC too, so the person was able to recognize you. All right, so I'm sure when we're done, the person will approach to get to know the website. All right, we've come very far, and we've worked with a lot of stakeholders too. So I'm going to pick goodwill messages from some of our stakeholders, and it's going to be very brief. So I'll start off with a lady who also can relate to Ghana Broadcasting Corporation. She once hosted a breakfast show, popular morning show on television. She is now the general manager in charge of operations for SIGA. And ladies and gentlemen, let's put our hands together to welcome Millicent Atuguba.
Will do.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. For some strange reason, I woke up with some blocked nostrils. And then I called my big brother and I say, can you imagine I'm going to a nostalgic venue as GBC? And I woke up with a flu. Professor Raymond Atuguba, my big brother, he told me, your house in the village is strong. But it's good to be here. Pardon if I sound a bit nasal. I just spotted a dear mentor, Madam Akushika Akwe. Good afternoon to you, Mom. I have seen Kwame Waja in the background and a few others that I can relate to. It's been a long journey. It's been almost 20 years. A lot of waters passed under the bridge, but we are still GBC, aren't we? So it's good to be here, and may I address protocol as standing Honorable Minister of Information, if not represented, I'm sure, the board chair and members of the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation Board, the Director General himself, Prof., distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and if I may ask, add my colleagues in the media. On behalf of the State Interest and Governance Authority, especially on behalf of my immediate boss, Professor Pesa White, who is Director General,
and who I deputize in the area of operations. I convey my heartfelt congratulations to the Acting Director General, Director General of GBC, I should say, and to the entire GBC staff for this milestone. For 9 decades, GBC has not only informed, educated, and entertained generations, but it has also remained the vital pillar of our democratic journey and cultural heritage. From the early days of national radio to the current and era of digital transformation, GBC has consistently evolved while staying true to its public and service in its mandate. The theme GBC, 90 Years of Impact, is fitting because it pays tribute to the legacy for national relevance. These special public lectures, such as the one just delivered beautifully as the conveyor, is one that gives us more initiatives and creativity, and your distinguished speaker did justice to the topic. The state governance and interest, the State Interest and Governance Authority, SIGA, remains committed to partner you in your journey, and we remain very committed also to support you strategically in the alignment with government's agenda of resetting this country. May GBC continue to serve Ghana, the authentic and trusted voice that you are, and congratulations once again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have a rep from GIBA, Ghana Independent Broadcast Association? Is Gloria here? Okay. All right. What of Primpag? All right. I'll move to GJA. The GJA president is here. Let's put hands together.
Good afternoon, and permit me to stand on all existing protocols already established. Listening to Doc, this was really a very rich history. And as my brother just said, at a point we felt we were born in the 30s. But yes, you've taught us a lot. And whatever you said about GBC is true. GJA, on behalf of the national executives, on behalf of the National Council, congratulate the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation for its achievement over the years. 90 years is not a joke. And there's no doubt that there's no media house that is comparable to the GBC when it comes to broadcasting, professionalism, and ethical journalism and peace journalism. We give all this credit to GBC. The GBC, as we all know, has trained and continue to train journalists and technicians, not just for GBC, but for many broadcast stations across the country. And we commend you for that, Prof, and your team. The importance of public broadcasting cannot be underestimated. One, it promotes public interest. And on that, we say that the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation has served the public interest by providing content that informs, educates, and entertains. Another importance is independent and unbiased. The GBC, as we all know, is very independent and unbiased, providing a platform for diverse perspectives and opinions, and striving to achieve its constitutional mandate from its inception. And I believe that Doctor's presentation touched on a number of them. One other important of this public broadcasting, which is also the support democracy. As the only public broadcasting company, it plays a crucial role in supporting our democracy since 1982 by providing access to information, promoting critical thinking, and fostering civic engagement. Cultural preservation. As the mainstream public broadcasting, GBC helps preserve cultural heritage by showcasing our local art, music, and traditions, something GBC does best. In fact, this is the hallmark. Access to information. Remember also that GBC, for 9 decades, has provided access to information for marginalized communities while promoting social inclusion and equality. Quality content. Public broadcasting, as being offered by GBC, often produces high-quality content that is educational, informative, and engaging. Accountability. Aside that, this GBC, or broadcasting institution, has held those in power accountable by providing a platform for investigative journalism and critical reporting. In fact, GBC contributed to bringing to an end self-censorship. And I believe that that has made the institution very independent over the years. Diverse perspectives. GBC has promoted diverse perspectives and opinions in the public space, fostering a more informed and nuanced public discourse. And finally, community engagement. The institution, many of us still remember the critical role of GBC as a public broadcasting company, engaging with local communities, promoting social cohesion and community development, whilst providing educational content that is both informative and engaging, with the promotion of lifelong learning and development of citizenship. And I will end by saying that they've also helped to combat the impunity against journalists. When it comes to attack on journalists, GBC has played a critical role, and even this afternoon, as we address the nation, I know they will continue to support us in that regard. Thank you, and congratulations once again.
Thank you very much, Albert. I see a lot of guests that we've invited, some of our members, some of them who are on retirement and all that. And also, I'm seeing Dr. Roland Afoboni, who was Senate Director of Radio, so the former GJA president. That's him there. Thank you very much for joining us. And he still looks very young. We also have with us Mr. Yabuda Yabwafu, former chair of the NMC this year. And thank you very much for joining us. And we also have Dr. Sarah Akrofi-Kwaku. She worked with us here for, I'm told, about 30 years. And she's with the University of Ghana too. Thanks a lot for joining and honoring our invitation too. You'll be hearing more of it as we move on with our programs for this particular anniversary. I'm told that Madam Beatrice Edu is also here with us. There she is. Oh, okay, all right. And I'm also seeing Mr. Fred Kumase, there's Chris Popolampo, a lot of them here will join us. Thank you very much for honoring us. Okay, all right. Mr. Abimakwe is also here.
Hey, you're welcome. Okay, so we are about wrapping up the program, and we invite the Ghana Dance Ensemble to give us a spectacular performance.
Years of broadcasting and memories. Yes, GBC is 90. 9 solid decades of serving you the best in entertainment, news, education, sustained heritage, and helping to shape our collective development. From the golden age of radio and television to the digital revolution, we've been here for it all. I'm Pete. Join us as we celebrate 90 years of broadcasting impact, relive the moments that shaped us, and expect timeless quality programming. Tune in to all the GBC radio, television, and digital platforms to be part of our legacy in business and operations.
GBC, 90 years of impact.
Abba,
90 years of broadcasting and memories. Yes, GBC is 90. 9 solid decades of serving you the best in entertainment, news, education, sustained heritage, and helping to shape our collective development. From the golden age of radio and television to the digital revolution, we've been here for it all. I'm Pete. Join us as we celebrate 90 years of broadcasting impact, relive the moments that shaped us, and expect timeless quality programming. Tune in to all the GBC radio, television, and digital platforms to be part of our legacy in business and operations.
GBC, 90 years of impact.
Thanks a lot once again. We've been live on all our platforms of the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation, on radio, on television, and of course on the internet too, strongly also appearing on social media and all digital platforms. I'd like to thank a lot for your time and your presence here. Thank our guest speaker for joining us and the great lecture that you've delivered. We're so grateful. Thank you very much. We'd like to thank the NMC Chair, Prof. Thank you too for also joining us, and thank our invited guest. And on behalf of the Director General of the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation, we thank everybody for the support you've given the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation over the years. I always say that, yes, you listen to us and you watch us on television, but without you, GBC is not GBC. And you've been very much committed to us. You've been very loyal to us, and we're so grateful. We understand that sometimes you criticize us. We understand that sometimes the expectation is so high. You do that because you love us. You do that because you want the best, and we are so grateful. And the promise, just as the Japanese would say, the Kaizen theory, that talks more about continuous improvement. That's our hallmark, and continuously we'll be improving. And for the next 10 years that we're going to be 100 years, hopefully I'll see everybody on our 100th anniversary, and the story is going to be better than the story that you're hearing today. And when, again, we are 180 years old, it's going to be another better than we expected. So thank you very much, and we're so grateful that you've joined us this afternoon for the lunch and the lecture.
So thank you very much. So just gone by was our generic promo. That's what we saw a while ago. So our next program is coming up on the screens, and we'll crave your indulgence to watch.
I'm Dr. Sarah Akrofi-Kwaku, a communications lecturer with the Department of Communication Studies, University of Ghana. I'm a veteran broadcast journalist. I have worked with GBC for over 30 years. I am involved in studying women and media. And on the 14th of this month, as part of GBC's anniversary, I'm delivering a lecture on women in broadcasting, pioneers of national culture. Women were indeed part of the making of radio. Come and let's share in this beautiful piece of information, and come and also share with me what you know about women's involvement in broadcasting history. Come and enjoy a conversation with Sarah. Come and enjoy a meeting with GBC anniversary celebrations.
We are 90 years. Yes, GBC is 90 years. Hooray! Join us for the second lecture on the topic, Women in Broadcasting, Pioneers of National Culture. Date, Thursday, 14th August 2025. Venue, GTV Studio 1. Time, 11 a.m. It will be live on all the TV channels and 18 radio stations of GBC across the country. Let's join hands to celebrate GBC's 90 years of commitment to authentic, trusted, and impactful broadcasting.
GBC, 90 years of impact.
And you can't afford to miss this beautiful conversation with the woman herself, Madam Sarah Akrofi-Kwaku, and she's sitting pretty over here. We can't miss this program. Right. So we're just about wrapping up today's lecture. George, what do you have to say?
All right, we would quickly go for the Islamic closing prayer, but a conversation with Sarah. That sounds like a nice TV program.
Exactly. Yeah.
Nice TV radio program. Yeah. A conversation with Sarah. You know, that's cool. I can get you a producer if you don't mind.
Exactly, bi-weekly program.
All right. When the closing prayer is said, we'll have our invited guests together with our directors who will kindly step out. The rest will stay here, and our ushers will take care of you. And when you're stepping out, there's a bookmark as a souvenir for everybody here. So you see Chassis, and he'll take care of you for that one. So thank you very much. And the next time we're going to see you is going to be on the 14th of next month, where we'll have our second lecture. And it promises to be a good one, especially since it's going to be a conversation with Sarah. Our final prayer, I'll please invite Alhaji Tari to join us for the closing prayer. Let's put our hands together for Alhaji.
Please let's pray. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Ya Allah, we are very grateful to you for bringing this launch of our 90th anniversary to a successful end. Ya Allah, we pray that you take it to the next decade with progress for the GBC. Ya Allah, from here, we are going back to our various destinations. Guide us in whatever you want to do and give us traveling misses, especially to our guest speaker, Dr. Victoria Smith, back to United Kingdom. We pray all this in your name. Ihdina siratal mustaqim, siratal lazina an'amta alayhim, ghayra maghdubi alayhim wala dhalina. Amin.
Okay. Thank you very much, and have a good day and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you very much.